besides the school, I've had enough for today. I hit the radio dial and turn it up all the way. I'm playing UK hockey fan. UK hockey
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the UK Hockey Fan Podcast, NHL Shutdown series. This is part 4?
Part 4, yeah.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Finn.
And we've got Cliffy with us too from the very beginning of the episode today. Scott, are you there?
I am indeed. Good afternoon, guys.
It's so fantastic to have you on from the very beginning. This is a first for us. We're more than 40 episodes or something like that. Over 40 episodes in. We usually have Scott on the show, and he usually joins us in the middle. But for our special NHL Shutdown series, we thought, let's have Scott on from the beginning. So, Scott, great to have you here.
No, great to be here, and thank you for having me on. I'm quite honoured to be starting the show with you guys, so it's all good.
It's always great to have you on, and people that are listening, and if you're regular listeners, you'll hear a difference in the sound a bit. We're also working on some different production techniques to try and get Scott better. Scott lives more towards the north end of the country, and we're in the south, and because we're all stuck in our houses today, we're trying to tweak things to make it seem a bit better for us, make it sound like we're in the same place. So Scott, great to have you on in the very beginning. Regular listeners will know that you're in Sheffield and we're down near Oxford, but here we are all together. And we had some topics that we thought that we'd cover today. Loads of people have been writing into us on social media and giving us ideas and talking about teams that we should mention and that sort of thing. And I thought what would be a great idea today to try and identify with other hockey fans out there is if we could each talk about a team that's, you know, sort of close to your heart or whatever else. And then we'll talk about some more of our just general hockey experiences. What do you guys think of that?
Sounds good.
Yep, sounds great.
Awesome. Okay, I'm not sure. Who wants to go first? Do I go first? Do you guys want to go first?
No, you go.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to talk about a team that's really close to my heart because it's the team from sort of my hometown. Where I was born in a place called Perth, Ontario, in southwestern Ontario, Canada. And Perth has its own team called the Blue Wings, which I'll talk about on some other episode. But when I was really little, I moved to a place called Stratford, Ontario, and that's where I really learned how to play hockey and grew up playing hockey. And then before I moved on somewhere else, and the local team there, it was called, when I was a kid, was called the Stratford Cullitons. Like it?
I do.
Finn, I was talking about this, Scott, with Finn a minute ago, and he was like, "What is a Culliton?" And let me explain.
Thank you.
So actually,
yes, please do.
Actually, so the Cullitons, they're as a franchise or as a team have existed since 1962, and they were originally called the Stratford Braves. And so they were from 62 to 67. They were the Stratford Braves, and then they changed their name to something called the Stratford Bertals, and I'm not exactly sure what that is. I'll come back to that in a sec. That took them up to 68. So one season they were known as the Bertals, and then 68 to 75 they were called the Stratford Warriors. All of this predates my time. And then 1975, they became known as the Stratford Cullitons, and that's when I really started to know them as a kid and whatnot, and aspired to play for that team myself. And so the logo of the team was always like a Native American chief, and that comes from their original name, the Stratford Braves, given to them in 1962. So they kept that logo. And the reason they were called the Stratford Cullitons, and they were called that from 1975, and they just reverted back to Warriors in 2016, all that time, is because they were sponsored by a plumbing and heating company called Culliton Brothers. And I didn't know this for the longest time, right? It was literally just the name of the company that they were sponsored by, the Stratford Cullitons. So here was a team called Stratford Cullitons, and their logo was like this Indian chief. And I just thought it was like some tribe called the Cullitons, but it turns out it's a couple brothers that sponsored the team. And so Stratford Warriors, junior ice hockey club, and they were in the Midwestern division of the Greater Ontario Junior Hockey League. And when I was a kid, that was Midwestern Junior B, they were called. And there are some fairly famous guys who played for Cullitons and made it off the team, including some guys that I skated with back in the day. Eddie Olchuk is one, the Big O, and also Tim Taylor. Another guy who came through the Stratford system, and they've more recently been made famous by, there is one famous celebrity that drops in with the team whenever he's in town. Sadly, I share the same hometown as
Justin Bieber, I'm going to guess.
It is Justin Bieber, of all people. So there you go, crazy hockey connection. So the Cullitons played the Midwestern Junior B system. They were pretty successful. They've had a few guys go up to the NHL from there as well. Really tough team, and in a tough league. And they now play in the Allman Memorial Arena, which was just called the Stratford Arena when I was growing up. Same place, sitting of interest, sitting on Howie Morentz Drive. Because Howie Morentz, a real old-timer NHLer, is also known as a Stratford Streak, and he is probably the most famous hockey player ever to come out of Stratford, Ontario. And to give you guys more perspective on this, Stratford, Ontario, back in those days, was probably less than 20,000 people, and I think it's probably up around double that now. So it's not a big town, but it is definitely a hockey town. That's where I grew up, and that's my quick little synopsis of the Stratford Cullitons.
Nice. Very good. I also read earlier, also from the now Warriors, Stratford Warriors, they had a player called Chris Pronger.
Pronger, yeah.
He's a very famous NHL player.
Yeah, sorry, I left out Pronger.
No, but yeah, that's really cool how like a team, like a small town team, your hometown team, has players of like amazing caliber who have played for the town's team, you know?
And so, just Scott, I know you're going to come on to talking about a Sheffield team, and for me, I think that one of the big differences when I talk about playing hockey with Finn, who's still in junior hockey, is that you were growing up in a town. It's different growing up in a town where your local team is going to have guys go from there to the NHL.
Yeah,
because it's so much more aspirational. Yeah. You know what I mean,
Absolutely.
Scott?
I mean, yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look now, for example, in Sheffield, a former guest of the show, Liam Kirk, is a lad who's from Maltby, which is sort of between Sheffield and Rotherham. And he's obviously going on to bigger and better things. He's now playing for the Peterborough Petes and is a Arizona Coyotes prospect. So, yeah, but definitely, I mean, Sheffield's a very big city, but, there's not been too many high caliber players coming through the system and going on to bigger and better things like Liam Kirk is.
Awesome. Well, it's a great segue. Should we jump on to talking about the team you want to talk about, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. So it probably comes as no surprise to regular listeners, but the team I'll give a bit of a synopsis about is the Sheffield Steelers.
Awesome. I knew you were going to do it.
So they were... Yeah, absolutely. No surprises there. But they were formed in 1991 and were the first occupants of the Sheffield Arena, and that was built for the World Student Games. So they were owned initially by Ronnie Wood and David Gardner-Brown. So they were at the helm and were determined to sort of make the team a success. So in the early days, they gave players nicknames to be more relatable to fans. So there were nicknames for players like the Rocket, Ron Shudra, Turbo, Tim Cranston, and that kind of really set a bit of an identity for the team in those early days. So they then marketed the players and sort of paraded them onto the pitch of Sheffield United and Sheffield Wednesday games in the hope to sort of tap into the audience there. And then the club sort of got their name from the industrial background, similar to the Pittsburgh Steelers who play in the NFL, because Sheffield's world famous for its steel production. And I know you guys had a previous episode where you talked about the Stanley Cup and the origins of that, but part of that Stanley Cup was made in Sheffield as well, interestingly.
That's so cool.
Sheffield's got its own... Yeah, so Sheffield's got its own little... claim in the Stanley Cup there, but the Steelers began their first ever season in the English Division 1 of the British Hockey League, so that was in 1991. A year later, the Steelers then won promotion to the British Premier League before winning the league in 1995 for the first time. But they originally applied to replace the Solihull Barons in the top league. But when the governing body turned that request down, they found themselves playing in the third tier of British hockey. So they then began the season made up of players from a team called the Sheffield Sabres, who were like an amateur team, with the cream of the cash-strapped Solihull Barons defence, and that included former Edmonton Oiler Ron Shudra, whose son now plays for the Steelers, Cole Shudra, interestingly. They also had two players called Phil Lee and Paul Thompson. Paul Thompson also went on to coach the Steelers, the Coventry Blaze, and national team. So he was an early day Steelers player back in the day. They also recruited Canadian-born Mark Mackey from Chelmsford and netminder Terry Bagley, and then Ronnie Wood, who had shares in the club, was also a former Great Britain international who became the team's top scoring British player. But the first game they had, it was played in front of 2,300 people, and it was a challenge match against Durham Wasps, and they lost 7-1, so it wasn't a great start. And then they went on to have several different owners over the years, some good, some rather dodgy, shall we say. The club went into liquidation twice, and is now owned by current owner Tony Smith, and he's had the club since 2011. And interestingly, for any British hockey fans out there, Tony Smith also owns a company called Rhino, who manufacture a lot of the jerseys and shirts that teams currently play in as well. So he's always had an interest there. And Tony Smith's daughters have both played for Great Britain women's team, and one of them is the national women's team coach as well at the minute. So a bit of a synopsis about the Steelers' winning history. So during the time in British hockey, they've won 29 trophies, which is made up of 5 Challenge Cups, 10 playoff titles, 9 league titles, a knockout cup, a charity shield, a Hockey Fest championship, and 2 Benson and Hedges Cup titles. They completed the Grand Slam, which is winning all 4 trophies in one season available in 1995 and the 2000-2001 season. And that is pretty much it.
That is awesome. Such an awesome story, and the reason I like it is I know that we've talked about the Steelers going way back now because you've been here with us for all those sort of 40 odd episodes, but it always reminds me that there are proper hockey towns in the UK.
Absolutely, and Sheffield, it's well known. As soon as you mention Sheffield in British ice hockey circles, people either turn their nose up because of their winning history, so rival fans are like, oh no, not the Steelers, oh, you're a Steelers fan, or they are really enthusiastic about it. And people who live in the city of Sheffield who might not necessarily have been to a Steelers game know the name, and it is a bit of a household name in Sheffield, even though people may have not gone to a hockey game there.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, and I've only been to see the Steelers play once, and in fact, you and I met up at that game, Scott. And when I was working up in Sheffield for a little while, and I have to say, walking in the door of the arena there, it was like a portal to North America for me. It was, as soon as you stepped in the door, I could have been at home.
Yeah, I mean, they've really got that sort of North American feel with the stadium. The Sheffield Arena, it's a great venue. It holds about 9,000 people, and the whole feel to the match night organisation, the entertainment aspect of it with the scoreboard and how engaging they are with fans. It really is like being at a Leafs game, but I guess without the quality on the ice.
Well, it's really similar to being at, to my mind, and this is, I mean, not to do down the Steelers, because I think they're an amazing team and a really pro club. Finn and I went to an NHL game and an OHL game when we were recently back home, and it really feels exactly like the OHL, if I'm honest, which is big time as well,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the OHL, as we know, is essentially the best junior league in the world, and producing players like like Liam Kirk, who's playing with the Petes, and it's a great league and a good comparison, really.
Absolutely, and a perfect segue, because I think Finn...
All with the segues today, man. Literally.
So I think, Finn, you were going to talk about a team as well. Have you got one picked out?
Yeah, I was going to go for the London Knights, and one of the topics you said we were going to get onto later is like hockey experiences, right?
Yeah.
And I've been a Knights fan, and but like before the Leafs, to be honest, because you went back to Canada by yourself, I think, and you came back with a Knights jersey.
That's
This
right.
was ages ago before I started to get properly into hockey.
Yeah.
And so I've been a Knights fan before I was a full Leafs fan, you know. So I thought that I'd go to the Knights and do a bit of a history. However, this history isn't as short as you guys. I've just realised, because it's a bit of a bigger team, you know.
You have to try and claw her down a bit if you can.
Exactly, that's what I tried to do. I've taken down 6 pages to about 1, so it's okay.
So for listeners in the UK, we are talking about London, Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. So their history goes as they're actually called the London Nationals, and this was their franchise granted in the OHA in the 1965-66 season, and they were under the ownership of London Gardens Arena, and the Toronto Maple Leafs controlled all the players.
Yeah.
And there was a main reason because of this, because the Junior A League collapsed, which had the Junior A League collapsed, and the Leafs had they have 2 prospect teams before that happened, one of them being the Marlies,
Yep.
the Marlboros, and when the Junior A League collapsed, they needed another team to put all their prospects in. So then they co-owned the London Knights and put all their funds into it, and that meant they could also put all their players into it, their prospects they were trying to develop. So that means you have the Marlies and you have the Knights. So right at the start, they already had a Leafs connection, right?
For sure. And so are you going to get onto the splitting, because the Nats still exist as a team in London?
Oh, I didn't read the split.
Yeah, so somewhere along the lines, so there is an operational London Nationals hockey team at the moment still going, and they even have the Leafs logo.
Yeah. Okay. So I read about the Leafs logo. I didn't read about the split, because so what I've read, there was no split. There might have been the, what do you call it, re-sign of a team. I don't know. What do you say? Because the team got bought out.
Okay.
So after the 3-year tenure with the Leafs, they were bought out, and but first the Nationals were named just like the Cullitons after their sponsor. And the sponsor was the Canadian National Recreation Association, which is a Canadian National Railway organization. And yeah, after the 3 seasons, the NHL sponsorship ended, and it was sold to the businessman Howard Darwin, who also owns the Ottawa 67s, another team in the OHA or the OHL now, for $500,000. And they renamed the team to the Knights. After a contest was held by Darwin to try and pick a new name, and the winner called them the Knights and changed their colors to green, white, black, and gold.
I love their colors, actually.
No, the colors are really cool. I mean, they're not gold now; they're just white, if you remember, because the helmet used to be gold, and now they've changed it back to white, because I think they originally like those colors. But you were right with the design, the original design of the leaf with the Nats. It said the London Nationals instead of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the highlight of the Darwin era, which they call it after the different owners. It was in 1967, 77 to 77, when a Knights team, which is one of the most powerful Knights teams ever, led by future NHLers Rob Ramage, Brad Marsh, and Dino Ciccarelli, defeated the St. Catharines Fincups in the conference final in an overtime goal by Dan Eastman to advance to the OHL finals against the 67s. But the 67s were triumphant in 6 games in the league to win the league. And then the 1995-96 OHL season went down in history and broke loads of records as the worst team in the history of the Canadian Hockey League. And they set a new record for the worst season by finishing with 9 overall points, with a record of 360-3.
Holy smokes, that's terrible.
It was pretty bad.
Wow.
And then the team was bought again in the year 2000.
Someone bought the team that lost 60 games in the season.
This is funny. This is where I got a bit of a laugh. So in 2000, former NHL players Dale Hunter, Mark Hunter, and Basil McRae bought the Knights. They bought the Knights for $1.
Wow.
The actual Knights they bought for $1, and then the arena they had to buy for market price.
Bargain.
So it was like a really weird thing. So the arena would have cost like $1 million or whatever it would cost, you know.
Yeah.
And then they bought the actual Knights for $1.
Wow. That came with a skate sharpener and two washing
yeah,
machines.
yeah, exactly, yeah. It was just such a weird stat that I found in the fact that they highlighted out that it was $1 to buy the actual team. It costs more to buy the arena than the team. And then when you get on, when we get on, like you'll see some of the caliber of players, right?
Okay.
So in the 2004-05 season, the Knights set a new CHL record by going 31 games in a row without a loss. So 29-0-2, and that comes after that awful season.
60 losses.
60 losses. And in the Western Conference Final, the Knights defeated the Rangers. We watched the Knights v Rangers, which I thought was kind of cool too, to win the Wayne Gretzky Trophy. And in the OHL Finals, against the 67s, the Knights won the series 4-1 to win their first J. Ross Robertson Cup, ending the longest championship drought in the CHL's history. On the 29th of May 2005, the Knights defeated Rimouski 4-0 to win their first Memorial Cup. So the Memorial Cup is the QMJHL, the CHL, and the OHL all put together, and they all fight for this one cup, and it's all the best teams in the league, like top 3 or something.
Yep.
And so they won their first ever Memorial Cup. The Knights won this again in 2016 with help to 2 late goals by NHL players Christian Dvorak and Matthew Tkachuk. And then here are the notable the big notable players.
Wow, bigger than that. Bigger than the ones you've mentioned so far.
Well,
Cicerelli.
But yeah, so Cicerelli, Tkachuk, and Dvorak are all mentioned in this list. Bo Horvat as well, Vancouver Canucks. Max Domi, Montreal Canadiens. Rick Nash, he's a retired player. He played for Boston and the Rangers. Nazem Kadri, all Leafs fans know him. Corey Perry from the Ducks. Michael Hutchinson. We all know that guy is recent.
Lead singer of In Excess.
Yes. He also played and made the NHL. Brendan Shanahan.
Wow.
We all know that guy. Leafs guy.
Shanaplan.
Mitch Marner. Daryl Sittler. Patrick Kane, John Tavares, and Matthew Tkachuk, as I said.
Wow.
So these are all the big notable players that this team has produced. You said with the Cullitons, some big names were produced, like Eddie Olczyk and Chris Pronger. But I mean, this is a different caliber, right? But then again, this has been in the farm system for some teams for a while, especially the Leafs, right? And you have all these prospects being put in. Anyway, team leaders. I know this season has been cut short, and it's kind of weird, you know.
In fact, they've just announced that the Memorial Cup is totally cancelled.
No, yeah, it was the other day. It was completely cancelled. But the team leaders in 62 games this year it goes as follows. So Connor McMichael played for Team Canada when we watched the World Juniors recently. He's leader in points with 102 points in 62 games. It's more than a point per game player.
That's pretty good.
Ryan Merkley is the leader in assists with 61 assists. McMichael again, leader in goals, 47 goals. And Brett Brochu is the goalie leader in save percentage with a .919. Also very good for a goalie. And the team record is 45, 15, and 2. And they lead the league.
Awesome. Amazing.
But yeah, I found some of this really cool because the fact that it goes through from like being owned by the Leafs and then them cutting it off after 3 years, being bought by some huge like what do you call it, businessman.
Yeah.
And then going through probably the worst. They literally call it the nightmare, but spelled like night, like an actual night.
Yeah.
And then mare, so they called it the nightmare. And that was when they went through all the like droughts and stuff. And then they came back after being led by NHL players after being bought for $1.
It's amazing. It's amazing. One of the things that I find very ironic about that story is the fact that they had to get cut. They got cut loose from the Leafs to become a miserable losing team.
Yeah, how does that work? It should be the other way around.
Right. Well, that's an awesome story. Three really interesting stories of teams producing players for the NHL, right? And from three sort of distant corners of the planet as well. Great stories, guys. Before I forget, I wanted to big up one or two teams. Someone on Twitter mentioned to us that we always talk about Sheffield, so they wanted us to mention Nottingham Panthers more. So big up the Nottingham Panthers. But we did talk about them on 2 episodes ago, I think. Didn't we talk about Nottingham Panthers?
I can't remember.
So those guys, and also I love this one. So some of our listeners are in Scotland, and big up to a young fella named Lewis, who plays for the Lanarkshire Lightning under 12s in Glasgow.
That's cool.
Big up the Lanarkshire Lightning.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, I mentioned earlier that I was born in Perth, Ontario, and Perth, Ontario is in Lanark County.
Oh, because I have a Perth jersey and it said Lanark. It says Lanark on it. It says Perth and then Lanark underneath it.
So original Perth in Scotland, original Lanark also in Scotland. Anyway, big up the Lanarkshire Lightning under 12s. Go for it, guys. Right.
As the season ends.
So one other thing that I wanted to talk about today is I was thinking about sort of trying to remember my first, real experience or memory that involved hockey in any way.
Okay.
And I'll take a crack at this, guys. See if you might be able to dredge something up from your hockey past as well. So for me, my earliest memory of watching hockey was that I had a hand-me-down TV from my parents that was, I think it was probably my dad or something had it. It was, and I'm making inverted commas here, a portable TV.
How does that work?
And in those days, all the portable actually meant was could be picked up by a human being.
Didn't require a forklift.
Because you still had to plug it in. So it was only as portable as it was.
Take it from room to room.
As long as the lead was on to plug it into the wall. Portable just referred to the size of it, right? And so this thing, portable black and white TV, and this is aging me a bit. And and they said they weren't using it anymore because we got this mammoth thing that sat on the floor that was in like a wood box that was a TV in our living room. And so I inherited this little black and white TV, but it was absolute garbage for reception. In those days, there were obviously no Sky dishes or anything like that, and there wasn't cable and whatnot. This thing just had literally 2 extendable antennas sticking out the back of it that were attached to the TV itself.
So when you were watching, you would have to hold it up in the air to try and get signal.
So I'm coming on to that. And so the only channel that I could get, and this became all too real for me when I first moved to England and realized at the time that there were only like basically 4 channels depending on where you lived. And in those days, this TV could pick up 1 channel, and that was the CBC. And the CBC is where you got Hockey Night in Canada.
Okay, because CBC is like the Canadian version of the BBC, right?
Exactly right. So it had the strongest signal of any network, and so that for a crappy little TV like that, you could just pick it up. But to be able to pick it up, I remember that I had to use almost an entire roll of tinfoil, and sort of like craft it into a long sort of like wire almost, and I would like wrap the tinfoil over the ends of the 2 antenna, and then this long like snake of tinfoil would like go all over my room to try and catch enough signal that I could watch a grainy picture in black and white of a hockey game.
You literally made antenna extensions.
Yeah, and so the hockey games used to start at 7:00, and this was when I was about probably, I don't know, I was really little. So about the time I think I was sent to bed. So I would quietly turn it on, and you could stick a headphone into the TV, but it was actually like a singular earphone. So imagine like a set of iPhone headphones, but only had one. So you could stick it in one ear.
Most useless thing.
and with tweaking this snake of tinfoil running all over my room, and a thing plugged in one ear, I could watch a Leafs game.
Wow.
And in those days, for me, it was, as Finn, as you know, it was all about Daryl Sittler.
Yeah.
And so my earliest memories of watching hockey were watching hockey on this crappy old TV, listening to it through one ear, and just about making out in black and white the Leafs getting thumped by someone.
Yeah. Like, can we all point out the fact that the Leafs had long gone won their last cup before this even happened?
I was just about to say, so before I hand off to one of you guys, basically what that memory and what that experience led me to was those nights of watching the Maple Leafs on a little black and white TV is when I started hoping that we would win the Stanley Cup.
40, 50 years later or whatever it is.
Easy, fella.
That's still true.
So I'm still hoping. I still have exactly the same hope and determination that I had back then.
I barely do anymore at this point.
Scott, what would it have been like for you? What was your first sort of hockey memory growing up here in the UK?
Well, certainly very different to what you just described, anyway, Shane. But no, back then, when I first got into hockey, I was about 6 years old. So what it was, it's quite a funny story actually, and embarrassing for me. So I'm going to embarrass myself a little bit here for the listeners. But my sisters, who I've got 3 older sisters, and they all went to like the fairground. You know, when it comes into town and the fairground rides come in and everything else.
Yep.
And it was on a Wednesday evening, and all my sisters were allowed to go to this fairground, but I was too young to go. So I was 6 years old, and my mum said, "Oh no, you can't go. You're too young." And anyway, I started like absolutely bawling my eyes out, crying, like sobbing, and it so happened that my mum's cousin, we used to call her my Auntie Josephine, she came round just to check on my mum and see how she was. And she said, what's he crying at, sort of thing. And my mum explained, oh, he's crying because he can't go to the fair with his sisters, and, you know, he's too young. And my Auntie Josephine said, well, I've got a spare ticket to the Steelers, because she was a season ticket holder, and whoever she went with back then couldn't go. So she had the spare season ticket with her, and she said, oh, there's a game tonight in about 2 hours' time. I was going to go home and get a bit of tea, blah, blah, blah. He can come with me if he wants, and, you know, he'll keep him quiet and give your ears a rest from him crying. So she said, oh, yeah, take him then. And anyway, went to the hockey. Didn't have a clue what ice hockey was at this point. Got to the arena, heard the sounds, all the bright colours, everything else, and I was just in love from that moment. And the Steelers played, I believe it was the Medway Bears, they were called, who are no longer sort of in existence now. And I believe the Steelers won, but it was about 7,000 people in the building, and just the noise, the sounds, the sights, everything from that moment, I absolutely fell in love with the sport. And then sort of pester power, I pestered my mum and said, oh, I want to go again. And we went to the odd game here and there, but my mum didn't drive, so we had to rely on lifts from my Auntie Josephine and whatnot. And eventually, a year later, we all ended up getting season tickets, and then which I held a season ticket from being about 6 years old till about 20, and then I started to do media work with the Steelers, so a team who I idolized growing up as a child. I ended up eventually working with for a good 10 years or so, and yeah, so one of my early childhood heroes is a player called Ken Priestley, and he won 2 Stanley Cup rings with the Pittsburgh Penguins in 92 and 93. And Ken Priestley, he was one of the first players I remembered, and he was nicknamed the Messiah. And every time he scored, they played the song Hallelujah, that Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Yeah. And I just remember hearing that. Yeah, and I remember hearing that every time he scored, and he used to get about 4 or 5 goals a game. So you just hear this Hallelujah, and anyway, I ended up interviewing Ken Priestley about 5-6 years ago, and they always say you should never meet your heroes or never meet your idols because you often end up disappointed. But I tell you, he still is one of the nicest guys I've ever met. And I got a text from him on Christmas Day a few years ago saying, oh, happy Christmas, all the best, Ken Priestley. And I was like a kid on Christmas morning. I was like, wow, I've got a text from Kenny. and you know, here I am at that point. I think I was about 28 years old. And I was just like a child who'd met Justin Bieber or something crazy. And yeah, so that's my kind of inroads into watching. But then playing is obviously a different matter. I didn't start playing till I was 17, but that's probably a story for another day.
That is so awesome. What a great story, Scott. I love that. The notion that there was a season ticket in the family back then. I always think about hockey as being relatively, a young sport here, but of course it's been around a long time too. Finn, what do you got?
So mine is similar to Scott in the sense that I watched my first ever hockey games when I was 6. but I didn't go to a game for a few years after that. So the first ever game I remember properly watching is the 2010 Vancouver Olympics.
All right, okay.
And this is something that is really cool to me because I remember that I really, really wanted, I really wanted to be into it as well, you know? Like, I just wanted to, I ended up, loving it, obviously, and, we're doing this now, and I play myself. But I remember watching, because the first player that I remember is Carey Price.
Yeah.
Because he was in net, and you always see his name. All the other players are changing. I was like, oh, so who's this guy? Who's this guy? You know, but Price was always in the net, so I remembered his name. Okay, and he was one of my favorite players for years. But I remember watching it because we watched every single game. Because they were usually afternoon for us, so we'd be at home and it'd be okay. I was allowed to watch it, you know. And then there was one time, the final against the USA, and that's when Crosby scored his golden goal. And I remember sitting with you. And the rest of our family went out. They were like, "Oh, do you want to come with us?" And I was like,
No
I'm
chance.
gonna stay. I'm gonna wait this out." And I watched it, and we watched Crosby score, and we won, and I was so happy. And I just remember that being my first memory is watching Sidney Crosby and Carey Price playing in the Olympics, and that's my first hockey memory.
It's amazing. And I do remember that year actually that my older sister Shauna, you mentioned your sister Scott. My older sister Shauna sent us an Olympic care package just before the game started with all the Canada hats in it and everything else. We had Canada toques and Canada mitts and everything else.
Oh, I had a jersey as well.
Yeah, wearing them while watching the hockey. There's nothing better than watching a team you love with the jersey on and whatnot, you know. So that was awesome.
No, yeah, it's so cool.
Amazing. Awesome. Guys, what great memories. And we will definitely talk about our memories of sort of first playing ourselves on another episode as well. But I want to keep these ones relatively simple. Or sorry, simple, yeah. But also short.
Simpler the better.
Just me being on it makes it simple. We'll try and keep these ones short, but I wanted to bounce an idea off you guys that I haven't mentioned to either of you before, and I want to bounce this idea off the listeners as well. So so everybody's shut in, and the reason that we're doing these short episodes is to just try and bring them out a bit more regular, so people can have a little bit more hockey in their lives while all the leagues are off and whatnot. And last night we did one of the coolest things that I think that I've ever done that was just perfect for the situation. And that was here in our house, we attended a virtual pub quiz.
Oh yeah, it was really cool, and it was such a big it turned into such a big thing.
Yeah, it's totally cool. I don't know if you heard about this, Scott.
Yeah, you mentioned you were going to it,
yeah.
And I've seen a few other people attend them, but I've not heard too much about them though.
So this one was just a guy. He's an ex-pub landlord, and he thought, you know what? What'd be great is if everybody loves a pub quiz, and because everybody's stuck in their house, what if we just did it over the internet, and you could just join wherever you were? And he thought that he was going to do it just for the town that he was in, and what he had in mind was all the people that would normally come to his little pub in his little town could all just stay in their houses and do the quiz from their house. So he put it out there for them people to sign up and say, hey, if you're interested in doing this quiz, just subscribe to this YouTube channel, and I'll do the quiz live on the YouTube channel on a Thursday night, right? So he was expecting 20, 30 people, and he had 500,000 people sign up to do the quiz last night.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure he had 500,000 people signed up, but that means I'm pretty sure he said that was people from the same family.
Yeah, loads.
Because his and this is still crazy. His total viewer rate was 180, 200,000 people at once. All stayed right through to the end of this quiz.
It was amazing and so fun. It was just like being in a pub quiz and like a normal pub quiz. And so you just write down your answers and you self-mark them. It's just for fun, whatever. But 170 odd thousand or whatever teams entered, including us as a household. And I loved the fact that the last question was what was the current Guinness record for the biggest virtual pub quiz, and it was 1,000 people.
It's 1,600, and then at the very end he said, well, we've smashed that. I don't know how it's going to work. If anyone here works for Guinness, please get in touch.
Yeah. Anyway, so I imagine you guys know where I'm going. I'm going with this, is I wonder if we should consider holding the great big virtual hockey quiz.
Okay.
What I'm thinking is that we could broadcast live our podcasts are always recorded and then released.
Yep.
But we could broadcast live one night maybe in the next couple of weeks or whatever, and do a great big hockey quiz, NHL hockey quiz, so it's accessible to everybody anywhere they are. Something like 100 questions, what would it be? Or 100 questions, or 50 questions. I don't know.
Or just be difficult and do something like 55, because why not? Or 57, just
we
so
could
annoy
have five rounds of 10 questions, and then each round would be a themed round. Like one round would just be like centers, or just about goalies, or history of the NHL and things like that.
No, yeah.
So I'm sure I probably won't have been the first one to think of this, but hey, it's something we could do.
Why not?
The reason I wanted to mention it to you guys and people listening is, if you think this is a good idea and we should try it, maybe hit us up on social media. You can get us anywhere that you find UK Hockey Fam, and Scott is on Twitter, and he's does a regular Periscope, and he's on Instagram and whatnot. Find us anywhere. Let us know whether or not you think this is a good idea. Maybe we could hack something up.
Yeah, I reckon we should do 103 questions for the 103 years that the NHL has been in existence. I reckon that would be beneficial.
not a bad idea. Scott, what do you think of that idea?
Guys, I really like the sound of that, and I think it's something what the listeners would really hopefully be up for, and I think it's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, let's see what everybody else thinks, and between the three of us, we can start to put our heads together about it as well. But listen, we should jump off, because I want to keep these ones short.
Can I mention one last quick thing?
You can.
Thank you very much. Cheers. One of the big things that I found on the internet this week is that on the NHL app, usually have like, what do you call it? The taskbar at the bottom, or what do you call it? Taskbar. At the bottom of the NHL app on your phone, it has like your favorite team, and then like standings and stuff. I still don't know what that's called, but where standings usually is, they've created this thing called the pause clips or something, or pause videos.
Right.
And they basically got this thing where they have they've put up all of the old games that you can watch the full games, no matter whether you have the subscription to the NHL app or not. And they're also doing NHL player conferences. So basically, they get a few players on, and like these amazing NHL players just sit down on like a Skype call, almost like we're doing now, right? And there's like 4 of them, and they just talk about whatever they're told to talk about, and they talk for like an hour. So the other night, I think it was Ovechkin, Nick Foligno, PK Subban, and Crosby's done one as well. But they're starting to do this kind of thing, and I think it's really cool how not only have they put out all the classic games, so I think they kind of had that already, but they put out more classic games, giving you access to all old games and the full games of them. All the All-Star games that have happened, they've given access to, and then they're doing these player conferences. So I really think it's cool how the NHL is now really embracing this whole thing, and the fact that everyone's at home and trying to actually do something, and it's great that they're doing it to people that don't that don't have a subscription to the NHL app. And it's just for everyone. I just thought I'd mention that. It was kind of cool. I found out today.
Awesome. That is really cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, we should get out of here, and we normally do a bunch of shout-outs at the end of the show, and I think that it's probably, when I was thinking about it, it's never been more important than now to keep doing that, because these are small businesses that are still trying to keep things going through the C-19 crisis. And I think most of them are operating through mail orders, so they're still out there and still doing business. So the likes of Bionic Skate Blades, Puck Stop that's there with you in Sheffield, Scotty, they're still going. I think they're doing mail order.
Yep.
You've got Crosscheck Clothing that are nearby you in Rotherham, also still going, doing mail order. I've seen them, both these companies doing deals and stuff at the moment as well, so check them out online. Down here we've got places like All Star Sports, and I hope he's coping all right. You can get stuff off his website, but he also has an Amazon business, and you can buy stuff through there. All these places that if you know, even though there's a pause, those companies that support hockey all the time need our support now more than ever. So don't stop buying hockey stuff. They're still up and running. Remember them, and jump online and see what they got. Anyway, boys, we should get off.
Yep.
Great, Scott. So great to have you on for the whole episode this time.
No, I really enjoyed it, and it's been a pleasure, guys. And it's good to go down memory lane again and talk about the hockey memories. And even though mine's quite an embarrassing one,
I love that one. Awesome. Okay, well, we'll look forward to getting on again in a few days, and we'll think some more about the hockey quiz. But that's it for us. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.
And the best game you can name is the good